Nobody saw this coming, not the fans, not the sponsors, not even Angel Reese herself. One minute she was laughing on camera, flexing confidence, joking that the WNBA doesn't even pay her bills. The next minute, the entire internet was asking the same brutal question in real time. What happens when the money you're depending on suddenly isn't there anymore? Because behind the glam, behind the podcast lights, behind the luxury rent and viral clips, something snapped. Reports started leaking. Numbers didn't add up. A sponsor valued in the hundreds of millions was suddenly laying people off, bleeding stock value, and quietly cutting costs. And Angel Reese's podcast, the one meant to secure her future, was suddenly sitting in the blast radius. Social media didn't wait. Screenshots flew. Old quotes resurfaced. "My rent is more than my WNBA salary" stopped sounding bold and started sounding dangerous. Fans who once defended her swagger began side-eyeing the lifestyle. Critics smelled blood, and whispers turned into headlines faster than anyone could control. This wasn't about basketball anymore. This was about survival, because when your rent is public, your income is questioned, and your main sponsor starts collapsing. Pressure doesn't knock, it kicks the door down. And Angel Reese, she didn't just feel the heat, she felt the clock ticking. What looked like a dream partnership suddenly felt like a financial trap. And as the podcast's future started to wobble, one terrifying reality set in. This wasn't noise. This was the beginning of a reckoning, and Angel Reese was standing right in the middle of it. Before the panic, before the numbers started circulating, before the internet sharpened its knives, Angel Reese believed she had cracked the code. She wasn't just a WNBA player anymore. She was a brand. From LSU superstardom to national commercials, magazine covers, endorsement deals, and viral soundbites, her rise felt unstoppable. Angel didn't just play with confidence. She marketed it. Swagger became her signature. Visibility became currency. And she leaned into it harder than anyone else in her draft class. The WNBA salary was never the dream. Angel said it herself, laughing into microphones, telling the world the league didn't pay her bills. To her, that wasn't a complaint, it was a flex. A declaration that she had outgrown the traditional athlete path. Nil taught her early that attention could be monetized. That personality could be leverage. That being talked about mattered almost as much as being good. She watched influencers turn cameras into empires and assumed the same rules applied to her. Why wouldn't they? The numbers followed her everywhere. Followers, engagement, sponsors, lining up. The spotlight never dimmed. That mindset shaped every decision that followed. The podcast wasn't a side project. It was supposed to be the foundation, a long-term safety net, a platform she controlled, a way to speak unfiltered, build loyalty, and cash checks even when the season ended. And on paper, it looked perfect. Big sponsor, big valuation, big cosigns. When you hear $820 million company, you don't ask many follow-up questions. You assume stability. You assume security. You assume the bag is safe. Angel built her lifestyle around that assumption. High-end apartment, luxury rent, public jokes about money that sounded fearless because, at the time, she believed she was untouchable. She'd earned it. She'd survived criticism, hate, scrutiny, and relentless pressure since college. Every time people doubted her, she pushed back louder. That pattern worked on the court and online, so she trusted it everywhere else. But there was an emotional blind spot forming underneath the confidence. Angel tied her identity too tightly to momentum. As long as things were moving fast, she didn't slow down to question the infrastructure holding it all up. The podcast numbers didn't have to be dissected. The sponsor didn't need to be questioned. The checks hadn't stopped yet. And in a world where everyone around you is clapping, it's easy to ignore the faint creaking sound beneath the floor. The pressure to maintain the image only grew. Fans expected boldness. Critics expected Angel felt she had to stay loud, stay visible, stay unapologetic. Silence felt like weakness. Doubt felt dangerous. So she doubled down. More jokes, more confidence, more public honesty about money, not realizing that honesty would later be weaponized against her. Deep down, Angel wasn't reckless. She was ambitious. She wanted control in an industry where players rarely have it. She wanted independence from a league that still struggles to pay its stars what they believe they're worth. The podcast symbolized freedom, and that's why what happened next hit so hard. Because when the foundation you trusted starts shaking, it doesn't just threaten your income, it threatens your identity. And Angel Reese was about to find out that confidence doesn't stop consequences. It only makes the fall louder. And the moment the first financial cracks went public, the story stopped being inspirational and started turning ruthless. The moment everything flipped wasn't a missed layup or a post-game quote. It was a quiet corporate move that never cared about Angel Reese's confidence, her followers, or her timeline. While fans were still arguing about her rent jokes and podcast clips, the company behind her show was fighting for air. Layoffs started rolling in. Entire departments vanished. Then the number hit, a brutal stock drop that erased millions in a single day. Suddenly, the sponsor that once sounded invincible looked fragile, and fragility is poison when your lifestyle depends on stability. At first it didn't feel real. Big companies wobble all the time, right? Angel's name was still on the podcast graphics. Episodes were still dropping. The lights were still on. But behind the scenes, executives were cutting costs, tightening contracts, and quietly reassessing what was essential. That word, essential, became dangerous, because when revenue projections fall short by tens of millions, passion projects don't get protected, they get questioned. That's when the whispers started. Not from trolls, from analysts, from media insiders, from people who understand how ad revenue actually works. Long episodes with low retention, bad. Listeners dropping before the mid-roll ads, worse. And the most uncomfortable truth of all crept into the conversation. Fame doesn't guarantee ears, attention doesn't equal loyalty, and personality alone doesn't hold sponsors when numbers slide. Then came the first shocking twist. The one Angel couldn't spin away with humor. Reports surfaced that pay structures tied to performance and ad delivery could be reworked, delayed, reduced, renegotiated. No public announcement, no dramatic headline, just quiet recalibration. And for someone whose rent clock doesn't pause, quiet is terrifying. Old clips resurfaced instantly. The WNBA doesn't pay my bills. My rent is more than my salary. Lines that once sounded bold now echoed like warnings. Social media flipped from admiration to arithmetic. Fans did the math in real time. Screenshots spread. Comment sections turned cold. The narrative hardened. If the podcast slips, what's left? Angel felt the shift. You could see it in her tone. The confidence was still there, but it had an edge now. Sharper, tighter, more defensive. Jokes landed differently. Silence lasted longer. The flex that once made her relatable now made her a target. Critics didn't just question her spending, they questioned her planning. And in the content economy, perception can kill faster than facts. The locker room stakes crept in too. Teammates noticed the noise. Coaches felt the distraction. Every question became loaded. Every answer dissected. Angel wasn't just playing through pressure anymore. She was carrying a brand under scrutiny while trying to perform in a league that already demands emotional toughness. That dual weight started to show, and then came the detail no one expected to matter. The ad window. Industry voices pointed out that most podcast revenue lives in a narrow time slot. If listeners don't stay, the money evaporates. Suddenly, Angel's biggest asset, her visibility, became a liability. Because if the audience wasn't listening all the way through, the checks weren't guaranteed. And if the checks weren't guaranteed, neither was the lifestyle built around them. That realization landed like a punch. Not public bankruptcy, not cancellation, something worse. Uncertainty. The kind that keeps you awake at night. The kind that turns confidence into calculation. The kind that makes every episode feel like an audition instead of a victory lap. And just as Angel was trying to steady herself, the pressure didn't ease, it multiplied. Because the conversation wasn't done escalating, it was only getting started. Once uncertainty entered the picture, it didn't sit quietly, it spread fast. What started as financial anxiety around a podcast sponsor exploded into a full-blown pressure storm that Angel Reese couldn't outrun, no matter how loud her confidence stayed. Because when money gets shaky, everyone starts talking at once. Executives, media personalities, fans, critics, even people who were waiting patiently for a reason to turn. The second escalation hit when analysts began openly questioning whether Angel had built her entire post-college plan on a single unstable pillar. Not endorsements, not diversified deals, one podcast, one sponsor, one pipeline. And now that pipeline looked clogged. Industry voices didn't sugarcoat it. They talked about ad retention, CPM drops, listener fall-off, and contract clauses that kick in when numbers don't meet expectations. None of it was personal, which somehow made it worse. This wasn't hate, this was math. Then came the second major twist, and it blindsided everyone. Reports began circulating that cost-cutting wouldn't stop at layoffs. Shows could be restructured, Pay models adjusted, revenue shares revisited. Suddenly, Angel's podcast wasn't just underperforming in critics' eyes, it was under review. That single phrase changed everything. Under review means nothing is guaranteed. Not airtime, not promotion, not protection. Social media sensed blood instantly. Clips of Angel laughing about rent went viral again, but now they were stitched with charts, estimates, and mocking captions. What once looked fearless, now looked reckless to a cold audience. The tone shifted hard. Sympathy dried up. People stopped arguing whether she deserved the money and started asking whether she understood the risk. And once fans feel smarter than the star, the power dynamic flips. The locker room pressure intensified too. Angel wasn't just answering questions about basketball anymore. Every interview carried financial subtext. Every smile looked forced. Teammates could feel it, the tension of someone playing while carrying off-court stress that doesn't shut off at tip-off. Coaches hate distractions, and this one was loud, without ever being mentioned directly. That silence screamed. Behind the scenes, brand conversations reportedly slowed, not disappeared, slowed, and in sponsorship language, that pause is deadly. When brands hesitate, it means they're watching reactions, waiting to see if a name stabilizes or becomes volatile. Angel Reese, once marketed as unapologetic confidence, was now being framed as a risk profile, and risk doesn't get premium dollars. The most dangerous part wasn't the criticism, it was comparison. Caitlin Clark's name started popping up again, not because she said anything, but because she didn't. Lower noise, higher demand, cleaner narrative. Sponsors love predictability, and suddenly, Angel's chaos-heavy spotlight felt less like energy and more like exposure. Then the whisper turned darker. People began asking if Angel had overplayed the "I don't need the league" angle too early, because when your fallback is public and it stumbles, you don't just lose money, you lose leverage. The WNBA salary jokes that once felt empowering now boxed her in. Critics argued she couldn't pivot without contradicting herself. The internet loves nothing more than catching a star mid-pivot. Angel's response grew sharper. Not louder, sharper. Fewer laughs. More edge. Defensive honesty. You could feel the frustration building behind the confidence. She wasn't wrong for wanting more. She wasn't wrong for chasing independence. But timing doesn't care about intent. And the timing was brutal. The escalation reached a breaking point when insiders began openly asking whether the podcast was helping Angel's brand or actively hurting it. That question changed the conversation completely, because once your own platform becomes a liability, the spotlight you built turns into a heat lamp. Angel Reese wasn't collapsing publicly, she was tightening, recalculating, bracing, and everyone watching could feel it. The dream didn't shatter in one loud moment, it cracked slowly, visibly, in real time. And as the pressure peaked, the audience wasn't asking if something would give anymore. They were waiting to see what breaks first. The fallout didn't arrive politely. It detonated the moment the financial instability narrative went mainstream. Angel Reese's name stopped trending for basketball reasons and started circulating as a cautionary tale. Timelines filled with side-by-side screenshots, her rent comments stacked next to reports of layoffs, stock drops, and shrinking projections. What once felt like bold transparency was now framed as tone-deaf excess, and the internet, once again, showed it has no mercy for stars caught mid-slip. Fans split instantly. Some rushed to defend her, arguing she was being punished for honesty in a league that underpays its stars. Others weren't interested in nuance. They ran the numbers. They mocked the lifestyle. They questioned the decisions. Comment sections turned ruthless, full of cold math and hotter takes. Live within your means became the rallying cry. Sympathy evaporated fast. Media personalities jumped in, dissecting every clip like forensic evidence. Podcasts analyzed podcasts. Analysts argued whether Angel had mistaken attention for infrastructure. And the most damaging part, the conversation stopped being about Better Collective and started being about her judgment. Once that switch flips, control is gone. Inside WNBA circles, the energy shifted to teammates stayed professional. But the questions followed everywhere. Every post-game presser carried a financial undertone. Angel could feel it, the unspoken curiosity, the quiet concern, the wondering whether this noise would bleed into performance. When a player becomes a walking headline, it doesn't just affect her, it affects the locker room. Coaches hate chaos, and this chaos didn't come with an off switch. The league stayed silent, which spoke volumes. No statements, no defense, no intervention, just distance. And in professional sports, distance usually means handle it yourself. Angel had always prided herself on independence, But now that independence felt isolating, the safety net she thought she built publicly was unraveling publicly too. Social media turned into a courtroom. Old critics resurfaced. New ones piled on. Even neutral observers began framing the situation as a lesson rather than a setback. That framing hurt the most. Because lessons imply mistakes, and Angel wasn't ready to accept that narrative. Not yet. The emotional toll started showing in subtler ways. Less playful energy. Sharper responses. A defensiveness that didn't used to be there. Confidence was still present, but it felt guarded, like armor instead of swagger. Fans noticed. Analysts noticed. Silence between episodes felt louder than words. Comparisons intensified. Other players with quieter brands suddenly looked safer, more stable, less exposed. Angel's visibility, once her greatest weapon, now magnified every stumble. And the internet loves contrast. Every calm moment from other stars became an indirect critique of her chaos. What made the fallout especially brutal was its timing. This wasn't off-season noise you could ignore. This was happening while she was still expected to perform. Still expected to lead. Still expected to carry herself like nothing was wrong. But something was wrong, not on the stat sheet, but in the foundation beneath her feet. Not on the stat sheet, but in the foundation beneath her feet. Angel Reese wasn't cancelled. She wasn't broke, but she was vulnerable in a way she'd never been before. And vulnerability, when mixed with fame and money talk, attracts pressure from every direction. By the time the dust settled on the discourse, one thing was clear. The public had stopped asking whether the situation was fair. They were asking whether Angel Reese had misplayed the biggest bet of her career. And that question wasn't going away. Quietly. Just when it felt like the story had peaked. The most unsettling twist crept in quietly, and it didn't come from critics or trolls. It came from the silence. No firm reassurances. No public guarantees. No, everything's fine statement from the people holding the purse strings. In the content world, silence is never neutral. It's a pause before a decision. And Angel Reese felt that pause like a countdown. Behind the scenes, whispers grew louder that the next phase wouldn't be dramatic, it would be strategic. Fewer resources, less promotion, a subtle shift in priorities that wouldn't make headlines but would be felt in every deposit, every ad read, every renewal conversation. That's when the fear sharpened. Not fear of losing relevance, fear of losing control. Angel had built her brand on being ahead of the curve, on calling shots before anyone else could, on refusing to be boxed in by league limitations. But now, for the first time, she was reacting instead of dictating, adjusting instead of flexing, calculating instead of laughing. And that change didn't go unnoticed. Insiders began asking a dangerous question. If the podcast wasn't the guaranteed safety net anymore, what was the pivot? More endorsements, a rebrand, a quieter approach, or a doubling down that risks even more exposure? Each option carried consequences. Each one required admitting something had gone wrong, publicly or privately. Then came the moment that rattled her inner circle. A delayed decision, not a cancellation, not a renewal, just waiting. In business, waiting is leverage, and leverage had shifted away from Angel for the first time since her rise began. The power dynamic flipped without anyone announcing it. The internet sensed it immediately. The tone changed again. Not outrage this time, anticipation. People weren't attacking anymore. They were watching, waiting for the next move, because the most compelling stories aren't about failure, they're about response. Angel Reese now stood at a crossroads, sharper than any defender she'd ever faced. Keep projecting confidence and risk being seen as disconnected. Pull back and risk being labeled shaken. Reinvent and risk alienating the audience that loved her edge. Do nothing and let the narrative harden without her. And hovering over all of it was the unspoken reality. Fame is loud, but stability is quiet. Angel chased loud. Now she needed quiet, and quiet is harder to build. When millions are watching your every step, the twist wasn't that the money disappeared. The twist was that certainty did. Because the real danger isn't losing income. It's losing leverage, and as the lights stayed on but the answers stayed off. One question hung in the air, heavier than any headline. Will Angel Reese rewrite this story on her terms? Or will the market finish writing it for her? Now it's on you, because stories like this don't get decided in boardrooms anymore. They get decided in real time, by fans watching every move, every post, every silence. Angel Reese's moment isn't over, it's at a crossroads. And how she responds next could redefine not just her brand, but how WNBA stars build power outside the court going forward. So here's the real question you need to answer for yourself. Was this a bold gamble that simply hit turbulence, or a warning sign that fame moved faster than foundation? Do you respect the honesty? Or do you think the flex went too far before the safety net was secured? Drop your unfiltered take in the comments. Not the safe one, not the polite one. Say what you actually think, because this conversation isn't slowing down, it's escalating. Read what others are saying, push back, agree loudly, disagree harder. That's where the real narrative forms. And if you want more raw, high-stakes WNBA stories that break past highlights and dig into the money, the pressure, the politics, and the moments that quietly decide careers, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications right now. Because the next move, Angel Reese makes won't just be about basketball or PODCs, it'll be about control. And when that moment hits, you'll want to already be here.